Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. My name is Brian Cradish with the Harris County Public Library, and I'm very, very excited to have another session of our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension program with the Houston Harris County Master Gardeners. Today we'll be joined by Annie Britton, who will be discussing butterfly gardens, understanding butterflies and creating your own butterfly garden. I know she's got a ton of great information. So I'm really excited to have that coming on. For our program today, we ask that you put any questions in the comment feed. Let us know where you're watching from. We love to know where we have gardeners watching us from. We're going to take questions throughout the program. And also, please like and share the program as well. The more likes we get, the more opportunities we have to share wonderful programs like this. So without any further ado, I am going to bring Annie on with us, and let me do that real quick. And Annie, unfortunately, doesn't have a camera today, but Annie, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, they sure can. I'm so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for joining. I apologize for the technical issues in the beginning, but I think we're just going to jump right in. So Annie, you take it away and let me know when you're ready to take some questions. So here we go.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming into this program. I think it's an amazing program that they put on at the libraries for everyone to learn. And good morning. I'm here to talk to you about butterflies. I think you see on the screen an entire ensemble of the butterflies that we see here in Harris County. This is a good portion of them. There are still additional. There are about 127 different butterfly and moth species that we do see in Harris County. And most of these you see here on the screen are those that you might see any given day in your backyard, especially if you make your backyard an inviting spot for butterflies. So let's get on with the show. First off, in Harris County, like I said, there are about 127 species, and these include the tiny little gossamer butterflies or the skippers, those that you'll walk by and you just see all this little activity, and they're just in there in the plumbagos, for example, and they're just flittering about everywhere. So the butterfly life cycle, the most successful habitats are places that a female can lay her egg, someplace they can kind of get out of the weather if it's rainy or stormy or even freezing. One thing to know about butterflies have specific plants that they lay their eggs on. Different butterflies, different species have different plants to lay their eggs. So if you want to bring them into your yard, you may want to plant a couple of host plants so that these butterflies will have a place to come and actually look for spots that they can lay eggs. That's going to be attractive to them. One of the ways that they know that you have these plants are that they have little chemical sensors in their feet as they flit by. As a matter of fact, I was watching the other day a monarch flying around in my yard, and it was just flitting by and just barely skimming off of several of the leaves of different plants in my yard until it could find the milkweed. Once it found the milkweed, it just stayed in that area, hovered around, and would eventually lay eggs. So they need to have a good food source also, which is when you lay eggs, that becomes the food source. And then, for example, a monarch lays eggs only on milkweed type of plants. Black swallowtails, they'll have a different plant. It may be parsley or dill. Tiger swallowtails, they like tulip trees. Different types of butterflies, different species of butterflies lay their eggs. That's called oviposting on different types of plants, and we will go through that. So here are the monarchs. We are very fortunate in the Houston area because we are on the monarch path. Monarchs go all the way from Mexico up to Canada. And they do this in a 4-generation trip. By the time they leave Mexico, they come to Texas. They'll lay their first generation of eggs. Those butterflies will fly off somewhere north of the U.S., maybe even into Canada. By that time, they'll lay their second generation of eggs. On their way back, they'll lay their third. Usually Texas becomes the spot again where they lay their fourth. Goes back to Mexico, and it starts all over. The Mexico butterflies will last 6 months because they're actually the overwintering monarchs. The other butterflies, the other monarch butterflies, they'll only last you a period of weeks. So every once in a while we have residents. I have seen residents in my yard. Residents are those monarchs that do not make the trip to Mexico. They may not even make the trip up to Canada. They literally like our area and they stay here. I've seen one that stayed for about 2 months one time. And the reason I knew it was the same butterfly is because it had that same little bite taken out of its wing. So as you can see here, you see the adult butterfly. You see those 2 little black dots? That tells me this is a male right off the bat. The females do not have those little black dots. This is your monarch caterpillar here, and it's already going into a J, which means it's gone through 5 different stages of growth from the time that it actually hatched out to growing, molting, growing, molting. They have 5 different stages of larva. Then once it goes into this J, that tells me, oh, this one's getting ready to go into a chrysalis. This is a very delicate chrysalis. At this stage, you do not want to mess with it, touch it, try to move it around even inside of a cage or anything like that because it's extremely delicate and it will not survive. Once it gets to this other stage where it's a fully formed chrysalis, has that little gold seal at the top, and I do mean it shines like gold, then it's a full-fledged chrysalis. And if it falls to the bottom or on the ground, it will be able to survive. After a period of a few days in the heat, maybe a week or so in the cooler weather, it will actually have formed its entire butterfly form inside this chrysalis. The chrysalis itself looks almost like a clear plastic coating by that point, and then the butterfly will hang from it for a period of a few hours while it pumps all of the fluids throughout its wings and will finally dry enough to where it can fly away. These are milkweed butterflies, and when you go to the nursery, you would look for milkweed types of plants. This is a Viceroy. Viceroy looks very, very similar to the milkweed, but let's look at it very carefully here. You see those 2 rounded curves on the dorsal fin, or the dorsal, yes, not fins, of course, wings. And they are kind of a round. We don't have all of the stained glassing. Let's go back. You can see here the monarch doesn't have that round on the dorsal wings. There's a little more stained glassing, I think, and I believe it has more of the spotting as well. Well, no, Viceroy has, oh, I know where the spotting is. On the monarch, you have the spotting, the white spotting on the actual body of the butterfly on the top where the head is, whereas on the Viceroy, you do not have that. Now, the Viceroy likes the willow and the poplar type family of plants. Queen. The queen is also in the milkweed family. It's a little smaller. It's not going to grow as large. It doesn't have all the stained glass effects, but it also does stay within the milkweed family of plants. So if you are attracting monarchs to your yard, you will most likely be attracting queens. And there are soldiers which look very, very similar to the queen. You notice they have the 2 dots. It tells me it's a male. They also have a little more coloring on their abdomen as well, and more of the white sprinkling throughout. The Gulf Fritillary. The Gulf Fritillary likes our passion vines. The passion vine plants are those that actually can produce passion fruit. So if the passion fruit is allowed to grow and seed out, it could become a little invasive. So if it does grow passion fruit, you probably want to pick them up. You usually don't have that many that you can handle them. The Gulf Fritillary, and I need to go back and talk a little bit about protective. The butterflies, because they're very, very delicate, and lizards love to eat them, birds love to eat them, spiders when they're in their egg and chrysalis form. There are just so many, I guess, predators. So butterflies typically will have some type of a defense mechanism. When you're talking about the monarchs, the milkweed is poisonous. If a bird eats milkweed or a cat or a lizard eats milkweed, it'll become sick and it probably won't go back after the butterflies, the milkweed butterflies again. The Viceroy's protection is that it looks so similar to a monarch, even though it does not eat the Asclepias poisonous type of milkweed plant. The queen, the same way, it eats the milkweed, which has the poison sap. And if you work with milkweed in your yard, make sure you always wash your hands. Do not ever touch your eyes with any residual sap, because I have done this. It was hours later, and I literally did go blind for about a week in my eye. So be very, very careful when working with milkweed plants, because that white sap is very poisonous. The Gulf fritillary. The Gulf fritillary, typically they'll have their passion flower, and they're not really based on a poisonous plant as much. It's not that poisonous to others. What they do is when they hide in their chrysalis, it's just kind of the color of the tree bark so that it's very inconspicuous. The butterflies themselves, they look very silvery. This looks like white on the picture, but it's a very silvery color, and they're beautiful the way they flit around. The giant and banded swallowtails. Here again, swallowtails are gorgeous. They usually have a little bit longer swallowtails. They're some of our larger butterflies. The giant is our largest butterfly in the area that we will see. It's often black on top with these bands around it. Underneath is just completely yellow. Now, the giant banded swallowtails, they like the citrus. They like the hot tree. They like lime trees. They love tangerine trees. They like the gas plant. And I've often seen them lay on rue. They seem to love to lay on rue. But then if you move them over, or if you put them next to a citrus tree, they'll eat the leaves of the citrus tree. And they do lay eggs on them occasionally as well. As you notice here, part of their protection, again, is their chrysalis, because it's something that spiders will go after, wasps will go after. Lizards typically leave them alone at this stage, and so will the birds. But they look a little bit like the bark of a tree. And one of the things that is a little different about the swallowtails, they create a silken harness. They will literally harness themselves to the edge of tree bark, and that holds them there in windy weather, rainy weather. It's something that protects them while they're in their chrysalis state. The black swallowtail. The black swallowtail likes those plants in the carrot family. I've even heard of people who've told me that they've seen eggs on their carrot greens. They like the anise, the fennel, parsnip, dill. I have a black fennel, and I often can get some butterfly eggs on my black fennel, but they seem to prefer green most of the time. Now, what you're seeing here is an interesting little process. You see the tiny little black and white? That's in its probably by now second instar. They're so tiny when they first hatch, you can barely see them. By the time they get to their fifth instar and are ready to go into chrysalis, they have this beautiful green and black and yellow coloring. Now you see up here this orange thing sticking out? Swallowtails have these. It is the osmeterion. That is another protective feature that they have. If they're bothered by something, or if they're scared, or they're just stressed, this little osmeterion will come out. And if you have your hand in the cage and you're messing with them, they will bend back trying to have that osmeterion touch you. It leaves an oil. It's kind of a stinky smelling oil. And it may not go away through 2 or 3 washings. That is their protection, again, against other predators as well. Here's the chrysalis. Again, it's a totally different look for a chrysalis. If they're in the spring, they more often will have a green chrysalis. In the fall or later in summer, they will typically have more of a brown colored chrysalis. And you can see that they have there's a harness here again, holding this chrysalis to the stem. Beautiful colorings, orange, blues, yellows, a very beautiful swallowtail. This is the spicebush. It's one of my favorite. I do have I actually have 2 small spicebush growing in my yard. And a little secret, I've never read this. I've never seen it, but I have done it, and it has worked for me multiple times. I will take some of the leaves from this spicebush, I will crumple it up on a breezy day. It doesn't have to be a lot of breeze, just even a light breeze. I'll crumple up those leaves, throw them as high in the air as I can, and somehow that chemical floats on the air enough to where Spicebush will usually show up in about 3 to 4 days. So it's just a nice little tidbit. And I've tried this on a couple of other species of butterfly as well, and it often does work. But they'll also lay on the red bay and they'll lay on the sassafras. But their favorite is to lay their eggs on the spicebush. Right now I'm going through primarily the plants that are host plants, not so much the nectar plants. These are the ones that draw them to you so that they can lay eggs. Here you see this beautiful blue coloration. Sometimes, especially on the males, it can be a deep, deep aqua blue. The way you tell whether it's a male or a female on the caterpillar or even on the butterfly is that at the end of their body, the end of their actual body, they have a clasper. If it's a clasper, it's a male. If there's no clasper, it's a female. Again, you see these beautiful orange colors. This one is primarily a brown on the underneath and a black on the top of the butterfly. Here's a pipevine swallowtail. And pipevine swallowtail, they are so excited when they find any leaves that they can lay their eggs on. They may lay as many as 100 eggs. One year I had quite a bit of greenery, and I guess they were so excited. I ended up with 80 butterflies because I brought them in. I actually kept the eggs, kept them fed once they became larvae, and released them. I had 80 that year. As you can see here, there's a clump of eggs being planted on this Fimbriata ivy. They like to have what they call the Aristolochia. They're the pipevine plants. They're typically going to be a vine, one of the prettiest vines that you can have, and it's easy growing and it comes back year after year, is the Fimbriata. So remember that one. The Fimbriata, which is the white veined. Here you can see the white veins where they laid the eggs. This is their favorite to lay eggs on. They also do like to have the Dutchman's pipe, which is the Trilobata. It's a little thicker leaf. And then I've had which other did I have? I think I've had the Tomentosa, the woolly pipevine. These are a maroon and orange. And like the Monarch, they're actually large enough that you can handle them just a little bit without worrying too much about damaging. They're very active. I've noticed that larvae can have different personalities. And my daughter, who for the first time ever tried to raise the earliest season monarchs this year, learned that even the butterflies can have different personalities. Some will take off and fly away. Others decided that she was their mommy, and they decided they were going to check out her face. And my daughter is a germaphobe, and to see a picture of a big monarch sitting on her nose was a sight to see. So anyway, here you can see the strange look of this chrysalis. It's almost an alien look, the way that it's formed. And again, it has the little harness that holds it to the stem. Here it's, you notice it has a lot of blue. The pipevine can have a beautiful deep blue when the sun shines on it, a lighter blue on the females, a deep, deep blue on the males. Even the underneath body, even the body itself can be blue and orange, very, very colorful. The eastern or even the western tiger swallowtail, it's a yellow swallowtail, and you can see the reason you can tell the difference between that and the banded is that the stripes are more of a vertical striping instead of a horizontal across the body striping. Very yellow. Most of the time when I see tigers, it's when there's a little mud puddle. And I have seen them stay at the mud puddle for over an hour. They actually use their proboscis, which is the tongue, to suck up nutrients from that mud puddle, and they will stay there for a long time. I haven't seen them very often on my flowers, but I have seen them in the mud puddles. A very colorful butterfly. They like the magnolias, the olives, black cherries, poplars, ashes, and the sweet bay magnolias. I believe they also like the cottonwood tree. The Polymatus. Now, this one is one I have not grown. I have grown 11 different species in my backyard. The Polymatus I have not grown in my backyard. It likes the laurel, the red bay, the swamp bay, and the sassafras. So if you have a sassafras, you may be able to have some of the Polymatus as well as your Lindera, the Spicebush. They're a strange looking caterpillar. Oh, and I didn't forget to mention this. I'm sure the Polymatus has the same feature that will go back to, oops, where did I go? I lost it. The Spicebush. In the Spicebush, and the Polymatus is very similar, but the Spicebush is much more colorful. This looks like its eye. You would think this is the head. That is, again, a defense mechanism. It will literally put its head and put it way down so that it looks like it rises up like a little snake. The head is actually down underneath here at the very bottom where it's going to be looking for a spot to start eating a leaf. But it looks like a big eye. It looks much larger than it is, and it can make itself raise up to look like a little snake as a defense mechanism. The Polymatus has a very similar aspect. It looks like it has eyes here. These are not the eyes. They are markings. The head is down underneath in here. The Polydamas is very similar to the pipevine swallowtail. It's, again, a maroon and orange, but the coloration is a little different. And it, again, likes the giant pipevine and the calico aristolochias. On the top, it's similar to the banded, but not quite. It has a wider trim around the bottom in yellow, and it does not have that horizontal across the bottom top band. Here underneath, it's brown and kind of a red-orange. The sulfurs, you will start seeing sulfurs late August, September, October, November, and December. They'll come out in numbers. And I've actually seen a couple already this season, but it seems to be early. They prefer plants that are in the bean family. Basically, your sweet peas would draw them, your sennas, your cassias. And I will go through and show you some of the pictures as we go through a little bit later as we move down. Now, this is an interesting one. This, I believe, is your cloud orange barred. It's actually the clouded. And I'm trying to see. I don't see it listed on here, but it's one of your clouded sulfur plants. And on one side, it looks like it just has some little spots, a little bit of clouding. If you get lucky enough and it stands still long enough for you, or you happen to catch it at just the right moment, you will see that it's actually black on the out edges of the wings, on the top part of the wing. On the under part, the underneath part, the dorsal, there is no black coloring. So it's a little strange because you don't see it. You see it one way and you think it's a different butterfly than if you saw it the other way. The Gossamers are your smaller, little, tiny butterflies. I actually discovered the Gossamers like the hibiscus. I saw some holes in a hibiscus flower that I had, so I decided to get down and see what was making that hole, and lo and behold, there was a little caterpillar. So I took the caterpillar in, put it into my little caterpillar haven, fed it some more hibiscus, and turns out it was one of these beautiful little hair streaks. It looks like, you can't see it on this picture, but it looks like it has a zigzag of lightning, and then it has some orange coloration, and it's just a pale gray color. The feelers are dotted, and it has almost like a little button on the end. Most of the butterflies have buttons on the ends of their antenna, whereas the moths not as much. But they do like your swamp rose, your mallows, and your hibiscus, and beggarweed, which I've not really seen very much of around here. The common buckeye, I have not raised a buckeye, but I do see them come into my yard occasionally. They like your plantains and your toadflax, your frog fruit. Sometimes they'll like the Yopon black sennas. You notice they look like they have spikes, but these are very soft. They do not hurt you at all. It's a little different looking caterpillar. This is an earlier instar, probably fourth instar. By the time you get down to here where they've lost much of their spiking and you see more of the orange coloration and the head becomes completely orange here, this is actually then the fifth instar. What you're seeing here is, and this head is quite orange, this is where it's molted. When they molt, they grow into the next stage, and they actually will shed their skin as they grow into the next stage. This one has just recently molted. It may, sometimes they'll eat their molt. That may be why it's actually sitting here right next to the molting of the shedding of the skin. This is in the passion vine family. It's called a Julia. I have seen one or two. These are going to be much more readily seen in East Texas. The zebra and the Julia are passion vines, and the zebra is a pawpaw plant. They like pawpaw. I have grown a pawpaw plant. It's still young. I seriously doubt I will see a zebra, but I just might see some passion vines come through my yard occasionally, but it is on a rare occasion unless you're in East Texas. Painted lady. I've been seeing quite a bit of painted lady. They do have quite a bit of red and orange and black and white. The underneath is not as colorful as the top fin. The dorsal underneath is not as colorful. And they are primarily going to be black with white, and they're a little fuzzy. They like your sunflowers and your mallows and barrage. They like the aster family plants. The question mark. My first year of raising, I raised some monarchs, but I also started realizing there were chrysalis all over the place. I don't know what happened that year, but they were very prolific. Sometimes they're called comma, and the comma and the question mark do have very similar, but a little bit of different markings. I'm not sure. I'm kind of thinking this might be a comma more than the question mark. But they're, again, very, very similar. Colorful on the top, very fuzzy brown. Underneath, they look like a dried up leaf. I mean, literally, if you were scanning the yard, you would see a leaf instead of a butterfly. And they do like the elm family of trees. So if you have an elm tree in your yard, they may go for your young. They typically will lay their eggs on the young growth of a tree or a plant. And they also like your hops vines. The red Admiral is another very colorful plant. I've seen them come through my yard. I've never raised one. They like your stinging nettle, and I don't mess with stinging nettle. So apparently someone in the area must have a stinging nettle, because I have seen a few of them flying through my yard looking for nectaring plants. The morning cloak. Oh, these are rare for me. I saw my first one at Wabash when they were on Shepherd Road, and it was gorgeous. And it's called the morning cloak. It's maroon, blue, creamy colors. They like the willow and the cottonwood and the elm trees. The skippers, these are the ones that they'll just fly in mass. They do like the plumbagos, because every time we have our plumbagos, sorry about that. Every time we have our plumbagos out in the back, we're just full of life with these little skippers flying in and out. They tend to have much larger eyes and quite large buttons on the ends of their tiny little butterfly bodies. They like your grasses, such as your Bermuda grass and your false indigos and locust grasses. They also like plants in the bean family, but I know they also like nectaring on my plumbago. So now, how do you create your own backyard sanctuary to create butterflies? Well, butterflies like bright, sunny spots. So the other thing I would say is, if you're going to create an area that you want to have inviting to your butterflies, it's best to plant them in kind of in mass, where you have quite a bit of color in one particular area. You can have flowers throughout your yard, but if they're flying overhead, they don't see things clearly like we do. They just kind of see a blur of color. So if they see a blur of red or yellow, or red and yellow, they will typically then tend to come down and explore, investigate to see if this is something that they may want to nectar from. So also, the other thing to do is plant a variety of flowers that bloom over, your periods from spring to summer to fall. I even had my September senna. It did freeze on me this past year, but it was blooming in September. There's actually a Christmas senna, but it does freeze easily, and it blooms in December. So also be sure, if you want to make it very inviting, include both host plants and nectar plants. Now, butterflies aren't as choosy across species as to what they nectar on. They're much more, they have to have certain plants to host, but the nectaring plants, it's more like, let's have a smorgasbord, or let's have some very, high nectaring type of plants, and you'll attract them there. If you have weeds or wildflowers, they'll do very well with wildflowers. Typically, they're going to prefer your native plants over your hybrids as well. If you have any trees or shrubs, they will go into them to have protection. I notice here in my area, I have quite a few oaks. I have some oaks behind me. They will go to roost, and the monarchs will go to roost in the oak trees. Sulfurs often will go to roost in the sennas because those leaves are light green to yellow, and they're able to camouflage better in the yellow leaf type of bushes and plants. Let's see. Different species of butterflies have different tastes. A variety of food plants provides flavor diversity, and you may attract a larger variety of butterflies. Female butterflies are interested in finding the right place to lay their eggs, as well as a place that they're going to be able to have food once they grow into the adult butterfly. In the caterpillar stage, each one can feed only on specific plants. I think I've mentioned that a few times. And it does encourage butterflies to remain in your garden year-round. And I will typically see butterflies in my garden year-round. I have been out on a beautiful hot summer day and seen as many as 15 different species in my yard at one time, 15, 16 different butterflies in my yard at one time. So I do have a lot of hosts and many different nectaring plants as well. Now, after the eggs hatch, caterpillars, when they're in their small, tiny first and second and third instar, they don't eat that much. You don't even really notice that they're eating. Now, by the time they get to their fourth and fifth instar, they're pretty good sized caterpillars. They do have voracious appetites. They may eat the foliage from your host plants. That's how I actually discovered the monarchs, because I had some plants that looked pretty, ragged. And as I started seeing these caterpillars walking across my patio, I realized what it was that was eating my plant, and that's how I discovered the monarchs. So anyway, the plants typically will recover, and I plant my plants for my butterflies. My yard guys would love to go out there and squash my caterpillars. They don't understand that I'm putting plants out there just specifically to attract caterpillars. So another thing to talk about that's very important, insecticides. If you want a butterfly garden, if you use insecticides in your garden, you probably won't be attracting too many butterflies. As we already talked about, they can sense chemistry and chemicals in their feet, and they'll be able to sense that there are chemicals that are poisonous and toxic to them. And if you do have pesticides, insecticides, butterflies are insects, and they too will be affected. Now, I have found that what I can do, if I feel I have an infestation and I don't want to let nature take its course, early in the morning before they start flying, not on the caterpillar plants, not on the egg plants, but just on my other plants, I can use an insecticidal soap. By the time the plant dries, the soap dries, it is no longer poisonous to anything that you're trying to spray. But while it's wet, it is. So I'll either get them early in the morning or in the late afternoon around in the evening when it's twilight and they've already started to roost. Those would be the times to try some insecticidal soap, but carefully again. Also, when you go to a nursery and you're trying to purchase your plants that you want for your butterflies, you must be careful and ask or know that you have a safe, trusty nursery that do not use pesticides to treat those plants that you're putting out in your yard, especially if they're going to be host plants. You might want to, if you do buy some, you may want to either let them sit in a place kind of off to the side where the butterflies won't find them for a couple of weeks. Maybe take off some of the lower bottom leaves, only leave the top very newest leaves so that perhaps you can get rid of, the chemistry, the chemical insecticide. Some people will wash them, take them in and wash them. That does help. But often people that raise their butterflies, they'll either raise a plant from seed or they learn which nurseries are very careful about insecticide. They may not use insecticide, but the person that they buy it from, the company they purchase from, might use insecticides on the plants before they get them. And there are some nurseries in town that are knowing that folks that want to, raise butterflies are going to come to them, and they've become much more careful about asking questions, often raising some of their own so that they can guarantee their plants do not have the chemistry, the insecticides on them. Prune the plant. Don't put it in a prominent location. Wait for new growth before presenting. I mentioned that. Wash thoroughly. That's a help. I mentioned that as well. Okay, plants that butterflies like. Large masses of color attract more butterflies than the small scattered clumps. Groups of flowers are easier for butterflies to see than just your isolated plants. Here's a few, and the majority of these plants are plants I have grown in my own backyard. The porterweed. Porterweed does freeze back very easily. I discovered them, I think it was in Costa Rica. But they sell them here for $8, and you can start with a small porterweed plant at the beginning of the summer season, but make sure you have a spot for a nice, good, brushy bush to grow, because by the end of summer, it will grow 4 foot high and could be 3 to 4 foot wide, but they absolutely love those purple flowers, and it draws and attracts the butterflies tremendously. I've actually seen some hummingbirds that will nectar on them as well. But primarily the Gulf fritillary, the Julia, the large orange sulfur, many of the butterflies. I mean, it just really attracts most of the butterflies. And it's a zone 9 to 11. It's our area, just an average watering, but they can get to be 4 foot tall by the end of summer. They can take light shade to full sun. Let's see. They don't want to dry out too much, but you can kind of tell if they're becoming dry, it'll start to look a little wilty. And they're purple. I believe I have seen that they may even have a red. The passion flower, most of us are pretty familiar with the passion flower, the passion vine. You can have them in purples, yellows, pinks, reds. But many of the red flowers, you have to be careful with the red ones because many of them may not support the butterflies or the caterpillars. So it's probably best to be on the safe side unless the nursery specifically says that red passion vine is for raising, or for butterflies. I would probably try to stay away from more of the red. It does say some of the blue, but I've had a lot of success on your blue purples, especially the natives. And I have one right now that is called Inspiration, and they do seem to go toward it as well. I once had a light pink passion vine. I can't tell you the exact species, but they did seem to gravitate toward that more readily than they have even toward the blues or the yellows. The Mexican flame vine. Now it's a vine. It will grow on a thick woody stalk. If you have a fence that you can grow it on, that's perfect. It will definitely put the flowers out toward where the sun is shining from, coming from the west, shining on them as they're maybe on the eastern side. It presents quite a bit of nectar. The butterflies love it. The hummingbirds love it. It does very well in our area. They can get fairly dry and still do pretty well. You don't want to let them get, exceedingly dry, but they can go dry for a little while. They like light shade to full sun. They probably prefer the full sun, but I've grown mine in some light shade to full sun. And they do grow quite fast, but it's good to give them something to grow over or a hanging basket. Fire spike. Fire spike, again, I typically cut mine down at the end of, in winter. This last year, mine froze down to the ground. It did come back. If they grow through 2 seasons, if we do not have a freeze and you do not cut them, they get up to 5 or 6 foot tall. If you cut them, they're a little later to bloom out in the year, but they'll stay probably at your 3 to 3 to 4 foot tall length. Hummingbirds absolutely love the fire spike. Butterflies will come and nectar on it as well. They do like full sun, but I have one that only gets morning sun, not the afternoon sun, and it blooms really just as well as the one that's in full sun. The Ruellia. The Ruellia can be an invasive. They have them in ground, basically just low down to the ground, about 12 inches to 18 inches. They can grow as high as 4 foot tall. Some of them, they're purples, they're pinks. They may possibly even have a white, but their seeds, well, it'll throw seeds and they can become pretty invasive. The Buckeye butterfly likes the Ruellia. And I'm excited. My neighbor grew some Ruellia, so maybe I'll see a few more Buckeyes this year. The golden dewdrop, or sweet memories. And this is a bush I used to have at my back window until I put in a huge patio. And you can see I have a giant banded butterfly sitting there nectaring on these purple flowers of the golden dewdrop. It's the Duranta. Hummingbirds also like this bush as well, which is probably why I had it near the window. It can grow, though, 12 to 15 foot high if you do not keep it pruned. It can grow pretty thick. I tried for a year or two to train mine to look like a tree, but by year 3, we had a freeze, and that was it. Had to cut it down, grew back from the roots, and it started out as a big shrub again. It can take light shade, which I have some growing in light shade. It grew amazingly well to full sun. They're in white. I have both the white and the lilac, and it can grow quite fast, and it is a Texas superstar, which means that it does quite well here in Texas. It's been tested. The Salvia. Salvias are definitely a butterfly and a hummingbird attractor as well. Salvias come in multiple different colors. Some of them are a little bushier than others, but they can grow up to about 3 foot tall. They're good nectaring plants. They do like full sun. They come in a variety of colors, again, as I said. There is a Texas star. There's a Texas star, which is the Henry Duelberg. It's the Salvia farina, and then the Mexican bush sage salvia and a mystic spire. That means that they do very well and have been tested for our area. The Xenia. Of course, everyone's familiar with zinnias down here, and it's a great nectaring plant. The butterflies absolutely flock to it. They come in multiple colors, multiple sizes, multiple heights. They can be anywhere from 12 inches, 18 inches. My neighbor had some zinnias, and his grew to probably about 2.5 foot. They do like full sun, but they come in reds, oranges, yellows. I've seen them in pinks and whites as well, and they're very heat tolerant. The Marilandica, the Hybrida, and the Elegans are Texas superstars, tested to do well here. The Mexican Senna. This is the one I have that blooms in September. Puts out the little yellow flowers. It attracts primarily the sulfurs. I have seen other butterflies nectar on it as well. It's kind of a smaller size bush or tree. It can grow, it says 3 foot, but I think mine was probably about 4.5 foot. Mine did freeze back though. I went ahead and pulled it out. It may have come back from the roots, but I didn't even give it that chance. They're yellow and they're very heat tolerant. They do like this cloudless sulfurs, sleepy oranges. These are all your yellow butterflies, some larger than others, some different markings than others. The candlestick. Now, interesting thing about candlestick, when I first started looking this plant up, they were called candlestick, and it was a cassia. Now it seems that in further studies, you can find it both as a senna or as a cassia. I don't know what they're going to settle on. It looks to be going toward the senna, but at one time these were in the cassia family. Again, sulfur butterflies. These can grow very tall. They can freeze back, but they drop seeds, and they can grow on a thick stalk. If you have a thick stalk and you only cut it part ways down, I've seen them come back from that. But these can grow as they're not big bushy trees or big bushy shrubs, but they're tall. They put out nice long lengths of leaves. They have this beautiful yellow flower on the top. They're an interesting plant, but the seeds can actually start to make this plant become invasive, but they are easy to pull up out of the ground. They're tropical, so again, they'll freeze, but I'm starting to see some small ones popping up in my yard. But they can grow up to 10 foot high. They do like full sun, very yellow. They're heat intolerant. And again, for the sulfur butterflies primarily. The sweet almond verbania. I have a sweet almond verbania. It froze down to the ground, but it is coming back from the roots in the spring and even sometimes in the summer and fall when the flowers are in full bloom. It puts out this beautiful light scented almond fragrance. It grows though in a habit similar to our vitex that we have here. I try to train mine as a tree, but they can end up being a shrub as well. It does say, tropical zone 10 to 11. Typically, I have not seen mine. Mine lived through many light freezes. But if you have a heavy freeze, mine is coming back from the roots. They do like full sun to partial shade, and mine actually has quite a bit of partial shade. And it's yellow and quite heat tolerant. The Spicebush, this one will not put out any noticeable flowers, but it does put out the scent of benzene when you crush it. It does attract the Spicebush swallowtail. An interesting thing that I forgot to mention about the Spicebush swallowtail. These leaves, when you have Spicebush that decide to make this their home, they'll lay their eggs, they'll start eating a line in the leaf, and then they'll start to put a little silken thread. It causes that leaf to fold over. That fold over creates a home. As the Spicebush larva grows into a 5th instar, a larger one, it will fold an entire leaf over, and it lives in that leaf. It's its protection. They also keep a clean home. They like to back out of that leaf. I've watched them do it. They'll drop their frass, which you can imagine, their poop, just drop it. As soon as they're done with their business, they climb back into their little house. It is that is one of my favorite caterpillars and butterflies as well. It likes partial shade, but it does not like our clay soil. It does better if it's in a container or in a raised flower bed. I've moved mine from a container into a raised flower bed, and it really seems to like that. I wouldn't worry about bloom colors. They're very, very tiny. It's more of the host plant. And I see I have a typo here. So designing your butterfly garden, again, attract many. Focus on attracting 1 or 2 species of butterfly if you want to start out. Then you can add later, but I'd focus on 1 or 2. Figure out what their favorite nectaring flowers are, or maybe put in a host plant or 2. Choose low maintenance plants, some plants that you don't want to have to go out there and trim and prune all the time, because it can get to be a little bit of work for you. I don't always practice what I preach, but many gardeners would prefer not to have to, go out there and do a lot of maintenance on their plants. So find some that may not be, demanding of much care. Try to have more of the spring and summer focus, so that you have different flowers that bloom at the 2 different periods. The fall plant focus as well, because some of these monarchs, especially, they migrate to Mexico. Water well, especially at the beginning when you first plant them, or you first plant seeds, or even if you bring in a new plant. Mulch around the plant. It helps retain moisture. If you have an outline to define your paths, it'll help your territory to be marked and your garden protected. Watering. Make sure that you can have watering for that plant if it especially needs to be watered and needs a little more moisture soil. So if you don't have a sprinkler, make sure you can get a water hose, or you'll be going out there with your little watering can, quite often. One thing about butterflies I've noticed, and the monarchs are especially like this, but I've seen some of the other swallowtails as well. On a hot summer day, if I decide to get out there with my watering hose, I'll do a little sprinkle, and they will fly right through it. They love playing in the water. So anyway, just experiment, have fun with it. I have some different plants up here. We've talked about most of these. Some of the ground level gardening is going to be your asters, your black-eyed Susans, your Mexican blankets, Mexican heather, milkweeds, You can find some lower milkweeds, purple coneflower, Burbanias, and Xenias. Then those might be at the front of your bed. Then at the mid-level, if you have an entire garden for your butterfly plants, would be bee balm, blazing star, cigar plant, common bone set, firecracker plant, acanthus, Joe pieweed, lantana, Mexican sunflower, mist flowers. They do love mist flowers. They really love mist flowers. Pentas, porterweed, and salvias. Then your higher, taller butterfly gardening plants are going to be your butterfly bush, your button bushes, your golden dewdrops, your hummingbird bushes, the Hamelia. Hamelia puts out light yellow flowers. Occasionally I've seen butterflies, nectar on it. Hummingbirds absolutely love it. Jatropha, Mexican bohemia, Mexican flamevine, and yellow bells. So that would be a way for you to create your garden from some of the various plants. I have a listing here. I don't know if there's any way, that the library works with getting lists to you, but I did separate for you here, and I could send one if I needed to get this out here to Brian. And we have the nectaring plants on the left side of your screen, on the host plants on my right side of the screen. Gives you an idea of which are nectar, which are host. So other than that, I'm going to need Brian to help me out a little bit with questions, because I cannot see questions at this point.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Annie. We got a couple of questions. Before we get to those, I did want to say a quick hello. We have hello to Pigeon Forge Public Library in Tennessee. I love when we get people watching from other states. We have a viewer from Hope, Arkansas. So we've crossed state lines, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
And the first question that I have is, what places do you recommend to get plants from? Do you have any local recommendations for places to buy these plants from?
I will tell you some of my favorites. Mm-hmm. I know that Buchanan's is very careful with their plants. They may get a shipment in and they'll hold them off for 2 weeks, just to try to make sure to see if butterflies are actually landing there, if any caterpillars are surviving. If there are aphids on there, that's usually a pretty good sign for them that it doesn't have poison on it. Another place that I really enjoy going out to is to Arborgate. They're typically pretty careful, especially if you tell them I'm a butterfly gardener. I need to make sure I have some good healthy plants. Another place that I've more recently discovered, especially for the milkweed plants, is to go out to Enchanted Gardens. They're near Richmond. They typically have a greenhouse where it looks like they grow their own. And I was able to, at the beginning of the season, my daughter told me, Mom, I'd gotten a huge milkweed plant from my neighbor next door. I brought it in so it didn't freeze. She put it outside, and I think she must have had one of the only milkweed plants in the area. It was very soon, like 2 weeks after the freeze. She had and this was her very first time to do this, and it was accidental more than anything. She had over 30 Monarch butterflies. And so I went over to Enchanted Gardens, and I was able to get a really nice bushy size plant. Now the larger ones are going to be pricey. They're $25, but if you plant them in the yard, or you keep good care of them, they'll last you all summer. What I would do with my milkweed, especially the tropicals, but the others are similar in a way too. Monarchs do carry a protozoa. They have which has a virus on it. Monarchs and butterflies, they all have little scales. You might not think they have scales, but they literally have little scales. Well, these protozoas will get in between their scales, and when they drop scales or climb or walk on these plants, they drop this protozoa, which carries this virus, and then the little baby caterpillars might eat it. They become infected. The virus, the protozoa, may get onto the caterpillars or even onto a butterfly, and it propagates the problem. So my suggestion to people is you'll have your new winter, you'll have your new summer growth coming in the spring. They'll probably be very healthy. You won't have, too much to worry about. at the end of that primary spring influx of monarchs that are coming back from Mexico to go on their way up, after you get that first influx, which will probably be over, I would say around May or so, May to mid-May, I would trim those plants down to where there's only about maybe a third of the plant left, or defoliate the leaves, either way. But I would probably cut them down so that they'll then have new healthy growth for the fall influx when they're on their way back from Canada, going back to Mexico.
Excellent. So we've got a couple questions and we're really running a little late on time. So we'll do real quick. If you have outdoor cats, will they be attracted to the milkweed or try to chew on it? Then they know that they can't always predict a cat's behavior. But
right, exactly.
Will they be attracted to milkweed, you think?
I've never seen a cat or heard anyone complain about cats. I think it might make them get a stomach upset. That's primarily what it does. Even the small birds and lizards, they'll just get an upset stomach and they'll throw up. Then they don't mess with it anymore.
Perfect. And then we received a question about copies of the list. So Brandy Keller works with the Texas A&M AgriLife. She posted a bunch of links throughout the chat. That is going to get all of the information that we showed that we can share with you. Some of the slides we can't share because the photos are taken by photographers and we don't have the rights to share that. But you can always review the program too, because we're going to keep this recorded. So I think that is most of the time that we have. Wait, let me see. We've got two more. One person's asking, where is your garden?
My garden is in that area between Houston and Katy. We're on the west side of Houston.
Great. And then the next one was a comment that you can dip milkweed solution in 10% bleach, 90% water for a few minutes to kill the virus, and that'll help with any kitties that might accidentally be eating it.
Exactly. Now the only thing is, if we go to that point, I would think that they need to really educate themselves before going to that point, because that starts to get into a little bit of a complexity. But for people who are comfortable with it, yes, it is definitely something.
Perfect. I would just like to thank everybody again for joining us. Thank you so much. We will be back next week with next month with our next Master Gardeners program. We are always going to be Tuesday at 11 o'clock. It's the third Tuesday of the month. And we hope that you will join us then. We are actually now broadcasting to YouTube. So if you'd like to watch this on YouTube, if you prefer that as a different medium, please do share with all of your friends. And we hope to see you soon. So thank you again, Annie. And
you're welcome. Thank you all.
Butterflies. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.